recognize Dixie State University in allowing us to schedule this facility. We've had some of our Freedom Forums here before, and we want to thank them and especially the fellows that are taking care of the audio-visual today. We really want to thank them for doing that. I would like to now, I guess, recognize Victor Iverson, who is one of our new county commissioners and has worked with the federal government. He worked with the Senator Lee's office and was working with the federal government in the lands area, federal lands area. And so he is very knowledgeable about the things that our Representative Ken Ivory is going to be presenting today. So I'd like to then turn that time over to County Commissioner Victor Iverson, and then he will turn it to introduce Ken Ivory, Representative Ken Ivory, and then we will give Ken about 5 minutes, about an hour.
Good evening, everyone. It's an honor for me to introduce Representative Ken Ivory. I also feel very lucky to be able to call Ken Ivory a personal friend of mine. As our nation sits at a crossroads when statesmanship and leadership seems to be so rare, Ken Ivory is one of those people that really restores my hope in this country that was founded on great ideas. This nation is a nation that is great because people were willing to champion the great ideas of equality and justice. And Ken is a man on a mission. He sees the unfair and lawless nature of what is going on in the West due to broken promises and the vulgar centralization of power in Washington, D.C. And he's willing to take a stand for the values of federalism and equality among our states, which in turn will result in prosperity and freedom for our citizens. Ken is also president of an organization known as the American Lands Council, and our own Commissioner Alan Gardner, along with Commissioner Heaton and other commissioners, after years of seeing the injustice and trying to work within the system, along with other county commissioners, formed what is known as the American Lands Council. But Ken is a person that inspires me. He inspires me to believe in this cause that he's championed, and I'm just proud to call him a friend. And he will also address the issue that there's been reports put out recently that show that the state can manage these lands, and we can manage them better, and we can do a better job, and we can secure our multiple use benefits out on the land. This isn't about pavement or development of our lands, but it's about managing them in a proper way that secures the best use for the lands and the prosperity for our county and for our people. Anyway, I'll turn the time to Ken.
If you don't mind, I'm going to lose my jacket because it'll probably fall off anyway. So I was in Texas last week speaking, and I said, man, dang it all, my rodeo career ended before it even started. I had this bicep tendon thing tear, so I get this little companion for a couple of months, but it doesn't slow me down too much. I'm so honored to be with you. What an amazing time. I appreciate Nick and everyone that put this together. The university, Brad's been great. We had a little meeting before this, and then a lunch meeting, and a bunch of our colleagues from the House and Senate were there. One of the things that Representative Kevin Stratton mentions very frequently, you have to know that your Utah House and Senate has done and is doing more to secure our rights of property and liberty than any other legislative body in the United States. We're leading the charge, and everybody's looking to us to do that, and there's a great opportunity. I'm thankful for our good commissioners. Victor, thank you very much. Commissioner Heaton's here. Alan, what a quiet giant. I am so in awe of him. He is so incredibly effective in what he does. You are very well served with that quiet good man. We've got Commissioner Clegg, former Commissioner Clegg here from Tooele County. He's been instrumental in the things that are going on. What an amazing time. With the gentleman earlier mentioned your Lincoln Day dinner. I want you to think about something for a second. Put yourself in 1855, right? Imagine that in 1855, somebody tells you that in 5 years from now, one of the two dominant political parties is going to be gone. It'll just cease to exist. And there'll be a president from a brand new party that'll be elected president of the United States. You'd think they were crazy, wouldn't you? Well, in perilous times, there's powerful political possibility. I believe we're in some of those times today. There are powerful, powerful political possibilities. Let's kind of take a look at some of this stuff. I don't know if I've got a click here again. Let's see what we've got here. Let me back up here. Oh, that didn't. This map kind of tells the whole story. Commissioner Heaton, have we had cards? If we can get those cards out to everybody if they want them. There's a little stack here. Did we not have more than those? If you want to take some of these cards, and feel free to take those. We had some more, but that map just tells the whole story. When we show that to people, it's kind of fun. You show that map, and the first thing they say, it's almost invariable. The first thing they say, you can probably imagine where they look at that map and they say, "Look at Nevada. Look at Nevada." You tell them the red is the federally controlled lands. Look at Nevada. And then the second question, you can probably figure out what the second question is. Why is it like that? Why? Well, that's a question we've been asking all around the nation for about 3 years now. So why is it like that? We've heard a lot of really cool stuff. I got to tell you, my favorite, I got a bunch of favorites in the answers. One of the first answers that comes up is, well, you see, your land is arid. So therefore, the federal government keeps the land. It makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Your land is arid, therefore the federal government keeps it. You know, the arid clause of the Constitution, we figured your land is more arid than somebody else's, so the federal government keeps it. You guys are familiar with that one, right? No, there's no arid clause in the Constitution. Think of that argument on its face. And I wish I was making this up, but this comes from law professors and political science professors and people that have been dealing with this for a long, long time. Think about Alaska. Alaska, you know, I was just up in Alaska in August talking about this. Alaska has 1 million lakes. They only have 700,000 people. They have 1 million lakes. And the federal government controls 62% of their land, 262 million acres. I've got to apologize to my friends in Alaska when we show this map, because if you put Alaska to scale, it's about 3 times the size of Texas at low tide. Arid. That's one of the answers they throw out. We just keep asking the question. We say, well, you know, that doesn't really make sense to me. You'd say, arid. The first time I heard that, by the way, we were with a law professor from the University of Utah. He's the law professor that says this is clearly unconstitutional, we can't do it. First argument is the land is arid. We're actually in a meeting talking to about 120 lawyers doing a continuing legal education. He trots that one out. And, you know, I said, I'm sorry, you got to do a little bit better than that. I can't deal with this subjective, it's arid. Well, the second argument that they come up with, they say, well, you just gave up your land. You just gave it up at statehood. I want to talk about that one for just a little bit, because that's the argument that they kind of tend to focus on. That when you ask the question why, they say, well, you just gave up your land. So I want to look at that one for just a little bit. But as we get into this, I mean, you've got the map on the upper left there. That's the federally controlled land. On the upper right, that's the roadless rules and the wilderness areas where you don't have access. Just the roads are shut off. You know, in Utah, 12,000 roads were just shut off. All over the forest throughout the United States. I mean, these commissioners can tell you, in every Forest Service plan and BLM plan when they come out, they're shutting off roads in every single plan. More and more roads are being cut off all over the West. This lower left-hand corner, that's wildfires, more than 250 acres. And then this map over on the bottom right, this comes from the Institute for Energy Research. That's $150 trillion in mineral value locked up in the federally controlled lands. It matters. what we're talking about. And it's important that we have the discussion. I don't care which side of the aisle you're on. By the way, in Nevada, unanimous bipartisan support from their task force to move forward on analysis and moving forward on the transfer of federal lands. Montana, they had 80% support, bipartisan, in moving forward on their studies. In Utah, Republicans and Democrats co-sponsored and voted for the bill. Some people like to paint and say, oh, this is just a partisan thing. No, the fact that we're burning more than 6 million acres a year with all the animals destroying the watershed, not a partisan issue. The fact that we're $2.5 billion a year below average in per pupil funding, not a partisan issue. The fact that our military is dependent on China for 95% of the rare earth minerals without which we cannot operate our military, or renewable energy technology, or all of the electronic technology that all of you are using right now, not a partisan issue. Yeah, there are those out there that want to try to make it that way, but it's not. So you can see why it matters. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Significantly, what we're talking about is this. We're not talking about this. Right in the bill, House Bill 148, Transfer of Public Lands Act, off the table national parks. We're not even talking about those. Congressionally designated wilderness, that's off the table too. We're not even talking about that. National monuments, with the exception of Escalante, off the table. Now the reason we keep Escalante off the table, we want to talk about that one, because we never got a chance to talk about it in 1996. Because on the eve of the election, President Clinton created a monument without talking to anybody in Utah. In fact, specifically, the emails and the records all show. In fact, Senator Bennett, about 3 days before it was designated, sent an email and called and contacted Secretary Babbitt and said, hey, we're getting wind you're up, something's up with a monument. Oh, no, don't worry about it. We'd let you know if there was ever anything was going to happen. And then standing on the south rim of the Grand Canyon, they locked it. It had never been done like that before. It had never been done where it wasn't something that the state or the locality had wanted. It had never been done like that before. Locks up 2 million acres and what is estimated as something close to $2 trillion worth of the world's cleanest burning coal. George Will, speaking to the League of Cities and Towns a couple of years ago, says, you want to know why that happened? The world's first largest deposit, or the world's second largest deposit of clean burning coal is in Indonesia, operated by the Lippo Group, which happened to be a very large donor to President Clinton. Again, now don't get me wrong, I'm not Republican and Democrat in Washington, pox on all their houses. It shouldn't be that big. Because the central government's grown under Republican administrations, the central government's grown under Democratic administrations. The problem is we don't have the control of our life, liberty, property at the most local level, which is the way it was intended. But in that particular instance, the circumstances surrounding the naming of that monument had never been done before. We want to talk about that one, so that one we want to keep in and talk about. But the others off the table, we're not talking about that. So we're talking about this, not this. Now in the work that we've done, in addition to the Transfer of Public Lands Act, we also passed the first ever Utah Wilderness Act. Because there are lands that we value, where we hunt and fish and recreate, and we think there are some lands that as we have the transfer move forward, and they honor the same promise to Utah, that we want to designate with wilderness characteristics as we determine in Utah. First ever that we've done that. So I want to be very clear in what the bill is and what the effort is and what it isn't. And I want to just repeat this a couple of times. This is about federal public lands become state public lands for multiple use, sustained yield with local planning. Let me clear that up again. Federal public lands become state public lands for multiple use, sustained yield with local planning. Think about all the television commercials and the stuff that you're hearing, and all the fear and all the things that are whipping up. Fear is the seedbed of tyranny. Always has been, always will be. But I'm kind of excited about it. The fact that they're spending millions of dollars shows you just how successful we're being, and how much this is saturating the western United States and the nation. So take heart in what's going on, because otherwise, why would they spend any money at all? But think about what they're doing. The only people talking about selling off the public lands are the ones that make money suing the federal government. They make money from the taxpayers, by the way, suing the federal government in ways that shut down our ability at the local level to protect health, safety, and welfare. They're the only ones talking about selling off public land. By the way, let me put out a disclaimer that a lot of people jump to the conclusion because my last name's Ivory, I must be a developer. Just so you know, I'm not close enough to get a discount. I'm from the withered branch of the family tree clear over here, right? But see, people jump to conclusions, and again, remember, fear is the seedbed of tyranny. Liberty and justice for all, as we talked about. Liberty creates opportunity and prosperity. Let's talk about some of that. So, in October, we gathered people from all over the United States. We had leaders from 14 different states, including South Carolina, and I believe we had Kentucky and South Dakota that aren't Western states. We had leaders from all the other Western states. We put together a policy statement that talked about just what we're talking about, so that we can get to better access and better health and better productivity. Because in every meeting that we've been in where we've asked people, under increasing federal control, how's access? Is it better or worse? It's worse, is what the reports have been. Under increasing federal control, is the health of the land better or worse? Every report that we have is it's worse. Under increasing federal control over our land, is productivity better or worse? So the whole notion behind this is to have federal public lands become state public lands so we get to better access, better health, and better productivity. And so this is the policy statement you can find on the American Lands Council, and that'll let you know what all the leaders that are actually working on this have determined unanimously is the policy that we're working from as we move forward on the transfer of public lands. And remember, fear is the seedbed of tyranny. Okay, so here's your quiz. All right, you ready for this? Which Western state do you think made these arguments to successfully secure the transfer of their lands that were controlled by the federal government for decades? Okay? Which Western state successfully made these arguments? Number one, federal control over vast amounts of the public land within the state restricts the state's ability to provide for and manage the growth and progress of the state. It harms the state's ability to improve, protect, and manage its resources, and it's detrimental to the state's ability to generate revenue. The Statehood Enabling Act terms create an obligatory compact such that any act by the federal government to even delay the transfer of the public lands would undoubtedly be an infringement of the compact. Which Western state? Such an oppressive system of federal control over lands within the state has implications of the deepest magnitude and demands the most serious attention of Congress. The issue of federal control over lands within the state involves questions of the highest importance to the state and the most intense interest of its citizens, such as, is it fair that the state is deprived of the essential powers and authority possessed by other states to the east? Should the state be deprived of the ability to protect the health, safety, welfare of its people? We'll talk more about that later. Why shouldn't the state have the same authority to improve and regulate the growth and progress of the lands within its boundaries according to its own views of prosperity and happiness, like the states east of it? Is it fair that eastern states should subsidize the state because the federal retention of lands deprives the state of the ability to generate revenue from vast areas of land within its limits? Why should the federal government exercise within the state purely municipal powers like land use and planning that don't exist in other states to the east, which only the state and its subdivisions have the right to pass, and which the federal government is not constitutionally authorized to exercise without the consent of the state legislature? Is a claim to such extraordinary powers by the federal government consistent with the rights reserved to the states by the Constitution? Or are they expressly granted anywhere in the state's enabling act? And finally, does the federal government have any valid and binding right to discriminate against new states in the West by retaining forever these federal lands? Now remember, this is a Western state that's made during the transfer of its lands that were federally controlled for decades. Any guesses which Western state? Yes, ma'am. Texas. Texas is a pretty good answer. Texas is the only state that was never really in this situation. You see, they were their own country, and then they came in as a republic, and the federal government never controlled any of their land. They're only 1%, they only have 1% federal areas within their state. Yes, sir? Hawaii. Hawaii is a really good answer, too. Hawaii is the western, well, it's not, Alaska says they're the westernmost of the western states, actually. But Hawaii is way out there. And in 1959, when Hawaii was made a state, right in their Enabling Act, an Enabling Act is the agreement at statehood, right? That's the agreement between the federal government as a sovereign and the state as a sovereign once it's admitted. And it's an agreement between the two of them. The Supreme Court has called it a solemn compact that's obligatory and binding on both sides, right? So in their Enabling Act for Hawaii, because Hawaii mobilized before they were made a state and said, there's no way you're going to control all of our land. And they mobilized so zealously that right in their Enabling Act it says, we hereby grant directly to the state of Hawaii title to all the public lands, title which was held by the United States immediately prior to its admission. Hawaii's a pretty dang good guess, but it's not Hawaii. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am. Utah would be a great answer, wouldn't it?
North Dakota.
No, North Dakota is another good answer, but North Dakota would be wrong. North Dakota was about 50% federally controlled at statehood. North Dakota, as you'll see in a minute, has word for word the same terms in their statehood agreement on the disposal of public lands, and the federal government did dispose of their land from 50% down to 3%. You ready for the answer? You think I tricked you, didn't you? I'm going to show you here that I didn't. Illinois was 96.25% federally controlled for decades. And this is the original resolution that they sent to Congress. They sent many. In fact, all of its neighboring states, Indiana and Missouri and Arkansas and Louisiana and Alabama and Mississippi, and you know that great western state of Florida way over there. Seriously, that's what they called themselves. Florida said, we're the worst off of all the western states because you're not disposing of our land. And they sent resolutions and said, we can't educate our kids because you're controlling all our land. We can't grow our economy. People are leaving our state because you're not disposing of our land. You can read this original resolution on the American Lands Council website. But Illinois, liberty cannot exist. Remember we talked about liberty and justice for all. Liberty cannot exist. Hence, life has no real meaning without the right and control of property. That was the foundation of our system. Liberty cannot exist. Hence, life has no real meaning without the right and control of property. What were they racing for? Land.
In Oklahoma.
In Oklahoma. Oklahoma was made a state in 1907. Oklahoma has the same statehood enabling act terms as Arizona and New Mexico. They were made a state in 1907. All of their land was transferred. They were racing for land because they knew that land is an asset, not a liability. You'll hear people and on these TV commercials, they want you to think that land is a liability. What are they walking barefoot with a handcart for? A piece of dirt and liberty and the ability to govern themselves. In fact, I stood on a path in Wyoming one time and it just affected me so profoundly. I had a church leader said, you know, all of my ancestors walked on this path to get to this piece of desert so they'd have a place to call their own and they could govern themselves. And I thought to myself, you know, most of my ancestors did as well. And they went to get the piece of land that was a desert. I think they said there was one tree in the Salt Lake Valley when they got there. But they knew that land is an asset, not a liability. And they went for liberty and property and to secure opportunity for their posterity. Ronald Reagan made a statement. He says, there are no easy answers. But there are simple ones. And it just takes courage. There are no easy answers, but there are simple ones. Now, in our national birth certificate, in the Declaration of Independence, it tells us why we have government. It says, to secure these rights, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, which in all of the state constitutions and in the original drafts of the Declaration, life, liberty, and property. To secure these rights, governments exist among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. This is where the power resides. But that's why governments exist. So this is George Sutherland. George Sutherland is the only member of the United States Supreme Court from Utah. Here's what he said about it. He said, man has three great rights: life, liberty, property. And they're so interconnected as to be a single right. Because if you give a man his life, but you take away his liberty, you take away all that makes life worth living. If you give him his liberty, but you take away the property, which is the fruit and the badge of his liberty, you still leave him a slave. Property. Property has always been essential to the fundamental of our system. So I'll give you a little quiz. Do you believe that the right and control of property, liberty, and self-government are essential to our unprecedented American system? Do you believe that these things are worth sacrificing for to pass on to our children, like those that came barefoot with a handcart or however they got here, to pass them on to you? Do you believe that if Illinois and the states around them can secure their lands, that we can do the same thing? And if they can do it, why not us? Well, I'll tell you, my personal mission statement, as Commissioner Iverson mentioned, understanding some of these things, I didn't expect to go on this odyssey in my life. But it's fascinating as you get more and more information, it's all consistent. My own personal mission statement is secure the blessings of liberty and property and self-governance to my children. Because Benjamin Franklin made a statement. He said, think what you do when you run in debt. You give another power over your liberty. Think what you do when 95% of your rare earth minerals come from a communist nation that are necessary for your national security, or for renewable energy technology, or for electronics technology. You give another power over your liberty. That's why I got engaged in the state legislature in the first place. So this is critical, okay? Rights that we don't know are no better than rights we don't have. And rights that we don't exercise are no better than rights we don't have. So when you look at that map and you think, wow, something's wrong with that, but I don't know what it is, and I'm really not going to spend any time to find out. Well, rights we don't know are no better than rights we don't have. And rights we don't exercise are no better than rights we don't have. And it does us no good to be the boss, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. It does us no good to be the boss in our government if we don't act like the boss. So 3 fundamental truths. This is what we're going to talk about, okay? This is where we're going. This is the whole summary. It's on the back of that little card. But this is the whole story in 30 seconds or so. The promises at statehood, the Enabling Act, the Solemn Compact, the Supreme Court has called it. The terms of the Enabling Act are the same. Utah and North Dakota, Utah, South Dakota, Utah and Nebraska, Utah, Louisiana, Utah and Alabama. They're the same. In fact, North Dakota and Montana and Washington, they're not just the same terms, it's the same document. The very same document created 4 states, North and South Dakota, Montana and Washington. Why the difference? The statehood terms are the same. And in our nation, where we believe in the equal protection of law, if you got the same promise, you should have the same treatment. That's the question. Promises are the same. Oh, let me back up here. As we talked about with Illinois, and I'll show you a few more things, it's already been done before. Hawaii and all the states east of Colorado, they had the same terms. But in Illinois and Missouri and Arkansas and Louisiana, it was also Iowa and Michigan and Florida, they were as much as 90% federally controlled for decades. And they just simply said, you know what? Liberty cannot exist. Hence, life has no meaning without the right and control of property. And they said, we're not taking no for an answer. And they succeeded. Why not us? And it's the only solution big enough to get to better access and better health and better productivity of our lands. So here you go side by side. This is North Dakota's Enabling Act. In fact, you'll see here it's North and South Dakota, Montana, and Washington in 1889. And this is Utah's Enabling Act in 1894, 5 years apart. Constitution shall not be repugnant to the Constitution of the state shall be Republican in form, not repugnant to the Constitution of the United States Declaration of Independence, and it will be done by an ordinance irrevocable without the consent of the United States and the people of the states. Same thing. This is North Dakota's over here. The people inhabiting the proposed states do agree. The only difference here is that little S. People inhabiting the states do agree and declare they forever disclaim all right and title to the unappropriated public lands. Now, a lot of people will like you to believe that there's a big fat period right there. Do you see a period right there? That's what they'll try to tell you. Forever disclaim all right and title. And I'm going to tell you that in 1894, that meant you gave up the land. Because those people that came barefoot with a handcart to get here for a piece of dirt, the very first act of statehood was to give up 67% of the land. Make any sense at all? It shouldn't, because it's not true. But that's what people will tell you. Because remember, fear is the seedbed of tyranny. Oh, so forever disclaim all right and title the public lands lying within the boundaries thereof until title thereto shall have been extinguished. It'll be subject to disposition, which meant to dispose in everything that you study in the history of the time, all the way back to when the public land question began. Look at Utah's, the exact same language. Here they dispose, here they don't. Here they go from 50% down to 3. Here we go from 86% to 67% in the same time. Why the difference? Your land's area, of course. One of the best explanations I heard once, this was actually a senior congressional staffer when we were running the bill. He said, well, Representative Ivory, this is all exciting. Wouldn't it be great if we could control our own land? Wouldn't it be great if we could access the resources responsibly and we could balance access, health, and productivity, and we'd have the opportunity to close that $2.5 billion education funding gap, and wouldn't that be great? He said, but it'll never happen. I said, wow, you're a real downer. I wish you got to me sooner. I spent about 6 months working pretty much full-time on this. Maybe you can help me understand why this will never happen. So, well, we gave up our land at statehood. Did we now? How do we do that? Well, it's in the Enabling Act. Is it? Well, I've read that a time or two. Why did we give up the land? Well, because of the whole Mormon issue. Because of polygamy, we gave up all our land. Really? And that's in the Enabling Act. Yeah, that's in the Enabling Act. Maybe you can help me understand where that is. Well, you see where it says forever disclaim all right and title? Yeah, I'm familiar with that. You're telling me that's because of polygamy? Yeah, that's why that's in there. Oh, what about over here? With North Dakota and Montana and South Dakota and Washington and Nebraska and Louisiana and Alabama. Really? Yeah, it's in their Enabling Act too. Oh, we'll talk later. We should probably talk later. That's the kind of things we've got to ask these questions. And rights we don't know are no better than rights we don't have. Rights we don't exercise are no better than rights we don't have. Also in the Enabling, oh, by the way, we're going to come back to this. This whole forever disclaim all right and title, there's all kinds of information on the website. If we had 5 or 10 hours or more time, I'd give you the whole detail. But the public land question started back in the middle of the Revolutionary War. They were out of money and they're in the middle of the Revolutionary War. 6 states had claim, or 7, Bill, what is it, 7? 7 states have, by the way, Bill Howe right here has written the most incredible book on this called Statehood, the Territorial Imperative. And if you want to know more about this, you got to get that book. But 7 states had claim to all the western lands. 6 states didn't. And then they're in the middle of the war, 1780, and they're completely dead broke. Imagine what you do. You called this big party called the Revolutionary War, and you're now out of money and the war's not over. And they're saying, hey, the 6 states are saying, hey, let's go sell all that western land, and we'll use that to fund the war. And the 7 states say, now wait a minute, that's ours. We'll use that to fund our share. You guys go raise taxes. And the 6 said, hey, now wait a minute, we're putting our blood and treasure into this deal, and we're not doing it so that you're going to be these great big landed states, and we're going to be over here, and we're going to be unequal in how this is working. That doesn't work for us. They called it the question of the age. They also said it was the great embarrassment. And statesmen that they were, what they did, any of you know familiar with real estate where you got like an escrow? They did kind of like that. They got together and they said, let's take that western land and we'll put it in like an escrow. or like a trust. In fact, the Supreme Court has called it a trust repeatedly. They called it a guardianship repeatedly. We'll put that land in trust for two purposes, and only two purposes. We'll use the land. We got to dispose it. We can't be a land baron like the king. We're not doing that. But any of the land that we sell in disposing of it, we'll use that to pay the debt of the war. And the second condition is only to create distinct republican states with the same rights of sovereignty, freedom, independence as all the other states. And on that basis, the 7 states said, okay. In fact, 2 of them said, well, not till later. But they started saying, okay, we'll do that, but only to pay the debt of the war and only to create distinct republican states. And they said specifically, no other use or purpose whatsoever. And on that basis, it was the states, you see, that ceded these claims to their western lands, to this collective, small U United States, to pay the debt of the war, but only to create new states. And so, from the very beginning, they ceded their claims to the western lands, and that continued all the way through, and that's why Missouri and Nebraska and North and South Dakota and Louisiana and Alabama and Utah and Colorado and Idaho, in their enabling act, said we forever disclaim all right and title to the unappropriated public lands. Because you see, those lands had come from Mexico and from France and from Spain and from Britain and from all over the place. And there were all sorts of conflicting claims. And they said, if we're going to be able to give clean title to industry people and to homesteaders and to anybody else, we've got to have clean title. And the state said, well, guess what? If you have clean title, that benefits us. Because the faster you dispose of it, the sooner we can tax and generate revenue from the land. And the faster you dispose of it, guess what's also in our enabling act? 5% of the proceeds of the sale of public lands, which shall be sold, shall be paid to the state to support the schools. So we want you to be able to dispose of the land faster and for more money, because it benefits us. You see why all the states, Utah, all the western states, all the states east of Colorado, they all did the very same thing. So that the federal government as trustee, again the Supreme Court repeatedly has said the federal government was a trustee over these lands, that they held the lands in trust for the states ultimately to be created. That they only held the land for temporary purposes in trust for the states ultimately to be created. And so we gave them clean title, just like all the other states east and west of Colorado did, so they could dispose of the land faster and for more money. Now, doesn't that make more sense than to say that these people that came barefoot with a handcart in the snow and no money to get a piece of land and have freedom and liberty and pass opportunity to their children, that their very first act of statehood was to say, we don't want that land anyway, why don't you keep 67% of it? Right? Doesn't that make more sense? Because that's what the history is. Rights we don't know are no better than rights we don't have. Rights we don't exercise are no better than rights we don't have. 2009, this is what got us started out, right? 2009, we discovered in 2011, after my first session, we discovered this case. United States Supreme Court unanimously issued a decision that said Congress does not have the authority to simply change unilaterally a state's enabling act. It's solemn compact. Doesn't that make sense? If we've got a deal, does it make sense that I could just change the deal whenever I want to, no matter what you say? What good is that? Well, when you've got an enabling act that is a compact between sovereigns, the Supreme Court said the consequences of admission, its enabling act, are instantaneous, and it would ignore the uniquely sovereign character of that event to even suggest that somehow subsequent acts of Congress can diminish what was already bestowed. And that applies even with greater force where virtually all of the state's public lands are at stake. That's the United States Supreme Court in 2009. What they said is Congress can't just go around and change your statehood deal all by itself. Makes sense, right? Based on that case, we started investigating. We started looking at the stuff that Bill had written. We started looking even deeper and going into history and confirming what he did. We found other stuff and went all over. And that's where we've been asking this question. Well, wait a minute. If Congress can't unilaterally change our deal, like they did in 1976 with something called the Federal Land Policy Management Act, where for the first time they said, we're just going to keep all this land in federal ownership, and we'll give you payment in lieu of the taxes you would otherwise get if we had kept our original promise, which is about 13 cents on the dollar, another story for another day. But they said, Congress, that was the first time they said, we're just going to keep these lands. Well, if Congress can't unilaterally change our statehood deal, that calls that into question, don't you think? That's what we started looking into. Now, there's another Supreme Court case in 2013, where the 2013, guys, this isn't ancient history. 2013, the Supreme Court said the constitutional equality of the states is essential to the harmonious operation of the republic. If the states aren't equal, well, then you can play the oldest political game in the book, divide and conquer. And we'll play you off of them. And we'll make you have to bargain to get this tilt so that we can get whatever we want over here. That just happened last year, where they went out to our Western representatives and said, in the Farm Bill, you've got to agree to this Farm Bill so you can get your $400 million of tilt for all the Western states so that we can put $200 billion in food stamps in the Farm Bill. Now, whether you like food stamps or you don't like food stamps, and whether you like PILT or you don't like PILT, the fact that we can be compelled, number one, to go have to beg when states east of Colorado have the ability to generate revenue and govern and have liberty over their own land. But in the West, we have to go beg to get revenue that's only 13 cents on the dollar anyway. We have a different name for PILT. We call it pennies in lieu of trillions. We'll talk about more of that in a little bit. But the constitutional equality of the states is essential. They also said the fundamental principle of equal sovereignty of the states, that our nation was and is a union of states, equal in dignity, power, and authority. You look at that map. Does that look equal in dignity, power, and authority? When you've got counties in Oregon that used to be able to harvest trees, they had the most productive forests in the nation, and they used to be able to harvest that renewable resource, and they had the best funded schools in the nation, they had the best funded public safety in the nation. Now Sheriff Gilbertson in Josephine County is down to 2 deputies, down from 30, and people are literally getting brutalized and raped. It was on NPR earlier last year, and he has to tell people, if you've got domestic violence issues that you know are at issue, you probably need to go live somewhere else. Their schools, they have a substantial percentage of their kids on free and reduced lunch. They used to have the best funded schools in the nation. And now that forest that was their greatest asset, in fact, Sheriff Gilbertson has on his sheriff's patch a logging truck, is what was on his sheriff's patch, because that's what funded their public safety in their schools. And now that forest that was an asset is a liability, because they have so many trees, they're competing for resource, and they're dying all over the forest. And everywhere they're a spark away from catastrophic fire wiping out their communities. You've got it right here. We've got it in Sevier County. In fact, in the report that Commissioner Iverson was mentioning, they said that 77% of the forests in the state of Utah are in catastrophic condition. Think about that. We're one spark away in the second most arid state in the nation. We're one spark away from losing our watershed. We're one spark away from millions of animals being killed. We're one spark away from the watershed being decimated like in Huntington Canyon. We're one spark away from the habitat being gone for generations. Constitutional equality of the states is essential to the harmonious operation of the republic. So this is what we had before, right? Remember? In fact, if I were to redraw this map, Iowa was in the same condition, Michigan was in the same condition, 90% federally controlled for decades. Well, how'd they ever get out of that situation? It was one man. One man, one leader who simply refused to take no for an answer. His name's Thomas Hart Benton. If you've ever read the book by JFK, Profiles in Courage, he's one of the half a dozen people mentioned in that book. He was a Democratic senator from Missouri. And he said, my election to the Senate found me doing battle for, not against anyone or anything, doing battle for changing this system of disposing of public lands. He said, I resolved to move against that whole system. He says, I filed a bill, but it was more so in the speeches. I went out and educated people, because remember, rights we don't know are no better than rights we don't have. And he went out and taught people, hey, wait a second. This whole liberty, property, self-governance thing is pretty critical. And that's where that Illinois resolution came from. He also says the federal government was like a stepmother instead of a natural mother. They became a monopolizer of the vacant lands of the West. Think about that, the vacant lands of the West. Who's he talking about? He's talking about Florida. He's talking about Illinois. He's talking about Missouri. He's talking about Louisiana. They were a monopolizer of the vacant lands of the West, like all monopolies that go into hardship. Few or none of our public men raised their voice against this hard counsel until I came into the councils. My own voice was raised against it. It's certain a great change has taken place. The sentiment of Congress, but more so that of the public, has become much more liberal toward land alienations. You see, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. He also says the members of Congress from the new states should fix their eyes steadily upon the period of the speedy extinction of the federal title to all the land within their respective states. How do you get people from Congress, members of Congress, to fix their eyes steadily on anything? Well, somebody's going like this, but more so, remember who the boss is? Deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. You want them to fix their eyes steadily on something, you melt the phone lines down. You want them to fix their eyes steadily on something, every time you see them, you say, hey, how come if the promises are the same, we're not being treated the same? How come if Illinois can do it, why not us? And don't assume that they know. And every time you see them, you send by carrier pigeon or snail mail or email or phone call, or when you see them in person, every time you say, if they can do it, why can't we do it? And if they did it, why aren't we doing it? And if the promises are the same, when are they going to honor the same promise to us? You want them to fix their eyes steadily? You ask them, if you believe in the right and control of property and liberty and self-governance like Illinois did, or like the people that founded Utah did, or like the 56 men that said, hey, we're going to put it all on the line for this idea that is America. If we believe in liberty, property, self-governance like them and passing it on to our kids like they did to us, what would you be doing? What specifically would you be doing in the associations that you're in the groups that you're in the letters that you write, in the speeches that you give, in the bills that you file, in the messaging, and in the emails that you send out? You want them to fix their eyes steadily? Every time you see them, every time you have communication, you take opportunity to communicate. And deriving their just power from the consent of the governed, they'll fix their eyes steadily. That's how that happens. That's exactly how that happens. It doesn't happen any other way. And by the way, it's happening thanks to you. I got a call from Congressman Chaffetz this morning. Actually, right before we were speaking earlier today, got a call from Congressman Chaffetz. He says, you know, I'm chairing the Oversight Committee, and we've got a subcommittee that is the Interior Oversight Subcommittee, and we'd like to know what we should look into. And we said, well, Congressman, we really ought to look into this whole access, health, productivity issue. Because under increasing federal control, access is restricted. And under increasing federal control, the health is diminished. We're burning 6 million acres a year, killing millions of animals, destroying watershed, decimating habitat for generations. We also ought to look at productivity, because under increasing federal control, productivity is depressed. They're moving. Congressman Bishop is working on working groups and congressional hearings. We got members of Congress from a number of states working on legislation, because you, who have the power in our government, are ensuring that they fix their eyes steadily. And now our job is to continue to make sure they fix their eyes steadily on the period of the speedy extinction, just like Illinois did. Some people have said, well, God, you got to look at what it meant in 1894. You can't just decide what it meant. I agree entirely. Let's go back and see what the state legislature back at the time said about our Enabling Act. This is a resolution from 1915. Senate Joint Resolution asking for a more liberal national policy in the disposition of the public domain. They said, we view with alarm and apprehension the national tendency toward the curtailment of the former liberal policy in handling the public domain and disposing of the natural resources. And then they say, in harmony with the spirit and the letter of the land grants to the national government. Remember, that was back in 1780, when it was the states that granted the land to the national government, and then all the way through, the states gave clean, clear title to the federal government so it could dispose of it faster and for more money. In harmony with the spirit and the letter of the land grants. The letter, that means you're required. This was what we're supposed to do in good faith, and the letter of those land grants and our enabling acts require you to do this, and in conformity with the terms of our enabling act, we memorialize, that means we urge, that was a nice way of saying we demand in 1915, President and Congress for the speedy return to the former liberal national attitude toward the public domain. We hereby earnestly urge a policy that will afford an opportunity to settle our lands, make use of our resources on terms of equality that's essential to the harmonious operation of our republic. with the older states to the benefit of building of the state and to the strength of the nation. What did our Enabling Act mean? Well, it's simple. Let's go talk to the legislature in 1915. That was less than 20 years from statehood. They kind of knew what it meant. You see, from 1776 all the way to 1976, we knew that Congress was a trustee. It was their duty to dispose of the land, just like they did with all the other lands. It was critical to the constitutional equality of the states, which is essential to our republic, and they knew those rights. But right after here, now you're in the middle of the Great Depression, and then right after the Great Depression, you got World War II, and by the time all that's over, you got a whole new cast of state legislators that have lost all sense of this history. And then you have a bunch of groups that say, hey, you know what? The federal government's been holding this land for so long, it must be the case that the federal government just keeps the land. Because that's the way it's always been, so that's the way it must always be. And by 1976, they say, hey, you know what? We're just going to keep all this land in federal ownership. But we'll give you this promise, this payment in lieu of the taxes you'd otherwise get. 1976 is when they did that. This is where this all started. You see how this is coming together? Liberty cannot exist, hence the life has no real meaning without the right and control of property. So why the difference? That's the question. Why the difference? Why the difference? We should be asking that question everywhere we go if we're concerned about this. If you answered yes to any one of those questions, is life, liberty, right and control of property, is that essential to our American system? If Illinois can do it, why can't we do it? If you answered yes to any of those questions, I'm guessing you're going to wake up in the middle of the night and say, doggone it, I got to get in the game on this thing. And when you're ready to get in the game, American Lands Council and what we're doing with these good commissioners and with the legislature in the state of Utah, we're recognized as the leader all over the nation. South Carolina did a resolution supporting the transfer of public lands. The National Association of Counties, the American Farm Bureau, the Republican National Committee, New Hampshire is just introducing a resolution. Texas is introducing a resolution. Tennessee introducing a resolution. Georgia introducing a resolution. Why would they do such a thing? Well, you see, Nevada did a study, and by the way, we've got states. People say, well, states can't manage land. States can't manage land. Well, we already manage millions of acres. In Utah, we already manage about 3.5 million acres of public land. And in the state of Utah, we generate $33 an acre positive net revenue, while the federal government, you see, loses almost $1 an acre. We already manage millions of acres of public land. Let's go through that. I like this one. They say, oh, what about the forest? Oh, the forest. What do we do about the forest? Well, we just did a huge study. $500,000 study, 18 months, a team of economists from our three major universities. 18 months of their study said, you know what? If we changed nothing about the way the federal government is managing the land today, including fighting fire, it would cost us $281 million to manage the land, and the revenues would be $331 million. I went to public school, but 331 is more than 281 by about $50 million. If we changed nothing. Right? Let alone more efficient management and not managing the forest for maximum combustion. You know, if we actually went in, and we used to have 30 operating sawmills where people had jobs and it produced income and it produced revenue, and guess what? It thinned the load in the forest so you didn't have catastrophic fire load and you had healthier forests. We're down to 3 mills operating on skeleton crews in Utah. Mills all over the West are gone from failed federal policies and then from lawsuits that are shutting down the harvesting of any trees. And so now you've got Commissioner Topham in Sevier County says, I'm supposed to have 40 trees to an acre. I got 800. I know that the very next spark that comes in my forest is going to wipe out my forest, is going to destroy my watershed, and my community's gone. Never mind, it's going to burn all the animals. It's going to destroy the habitat. It's going to pollute the air. That's happening all over the West right now. This is critical. But on the forest, look at this. How would we ever afford to do it? Well, the state of Washington, this was the Congressional and Natural Resources Committee, the state of Washington is only 1,283 times more effective at generating revenue per acre than the U.S. Forest Service. The state of Idaho is only 917 times more efficient at generating revenue per acre than the U.S. Forest Service. In the state of Washington, just this past summer, they had the largest fire in state history in Okanagan County. Federal lands burned all over. State managed forests, fire dropped to the ground because they were managed and the trees were properly spaced. Private land, fire dropped to the ground and they were able to manage the fire. But on the federal forest, it ravaged everything, which is happening all over the United States, all over the last drought. So like we pointed out before, access is being shut down. You know about this. A year ago, you guys know about this better than anybody. Federal government had budget issues. Well, it not budget issues, hadn't had a budget for 5 years. Had funding and revenue issues and couldn't realize what Erskine Bowles, Clinton White House Chief of Staff, said, what David Walker, the Government Accountability Office, said, what the American Institute of CPAs has been saying forever, that the federal fiscal situation is unsustainable. It's unsustainable. We're going to have difficult conversations. And instead of having difficult conversations, they deemed our national parks non-essential at the federal level. Down here in southern Utah and throughout Utah, they're far from non-essential. That's the lifeblood of our economy. It's an $8 billion industry. And the legislature met in emergency session to fund opening the national parks. When people say, can the states manage the land? We put our money where our mouth is repeatedly. The federal government deems these things non-essential, unfortunately. You've seen these already. This is happening by the millions. And people don't show these things. Oh. Government Accountability Office just a couple years ago testifying to Congress said there is more recoverable oil in Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming than the rest of the world combined, locked up in federally controlled lands. This is happening already as well. This is 2013, the UK Guardian, I think it is, UK Guardian. China is compelling South American countries right now to auction off hundreds of thousands of acres and all the natural resources to satisfy debt obligations to China. Isn't it a good thing we don't owe any money to China? You know, can you ever imagine what that conversation must have been like? Hey, we're out of money. You got any ideas? I got an idea. I'm going to go borrow money from the communists. What could go wrong with that? $1.3 trillion. Think what you do when you run in debt. You give another power over your liberty. How critical is it that we remind our federal partner that it is a trustee over these lands? That it has the same obligation to transfer the land to the states, just like it did with all states east of Colorado, before it gets to thinking, or before our creditors get to thinking, hey, you know what? We'll just use that as collateral. I think the best way to preserve our lands is to make sure that our federal partner honors the trust that was created at our state, but just like it did with all states east of Colorado. So on the website, there's an interactive map. You can go on here and click any of these states, and then you can click on these states here in the east, and you can find out what's happening, what legislation is happening. You can see updates on news and different things that are going on. Over here on eastern states, there's resolutions that these eastern states are passing to support the transfer of public land. You can see some of that. I'm just going to skip through this. Let's see here. This is a really cool quote. We'll do a blog on it at some point. I like this one, though. John Dickinson said, the government of each state is and is to be sovereign and supreme in all matters that relate to each state only, and subordinate barely in those things that relate to the whole, and it will be their own faults if the several states suffer the federal sovereignty to interfere in the things of their jurisdiction. It'll be their own faults. So we have a decision to make. Where is the line? Do we start to mobilize when 77% of our forests are in absolutely critical catastrophic condition? Do we wait until they're burned and it's generations before they'll regenerate? And that's the sponge that holds our water. And that's our economies in our communities. And that's the wildlife, and that's the habitat, and that's the air quality. You know, the governor in his State of the State address last year said burning one log is like driving it's like the emissions from a tailpipe of going from Salt Lake to St. George and back. How much are the emissions from 6 million acres a year? These are huge issues. These are conversations we have to have. So the path forward. Governor has laid this out. We've been working on this from the beginning. The path forward, education. People have to know this because rights we don't know are no better than rights we don't have. Rights we don't exercise are no better than rights we don't have. We'll talk about education for a little bit as well. Negotiation. What's happening there is when we've got interactions with our federal partners at the county level, at the state level, at the national level, we have to put these questions to them. If Illinois did it, why aren't you honoring the promise to us? If our statehood terms were the same as South Dakota's, why aren't you honoring the promise with us? When we have opportunities, when they're in front of our commission, when we're dealing with a variety of issues. Commissioner Miller in Iron County, when they're dealing with the horse issue, they have many times more horses than their own law says they're supposed to have. And when they're in front of the commission, they say, why aren't you honoring your own law? Your own law says you have to remove these immediately. And at the same time, he says, and by the way, you know, if you honored the very same statehood promise with us that you kept with North Dakota and all states east, we wouldn't even be having this discussion. That kind of negotiation is happening all over the West. Legislation at the local, state, and national level. Your county commission, your school districts, your cities, your farm bureaus down here have all passed resolutions supporting the transfer of public lands. Counties and communities and organizations all over the West, all over the nation are passing resolutions leveraging their voice. And then we've got legislation now beginning to be worked on at the national level. We've got legislators all over the West that are working on different aspects of legislation at the national level. And then litigation. Illinois didn't have to go that route. Illinois, Missouri, and Florida, for them it was education, negotiation, legislation. Well, we've been doing that. We hope that the federal government, our federal partner, will begin to negotiate with us in good faith. Do you realize that Canada is doing this right now? Canada, over the last decade, has transferred land, water, and resources to the provinces. And just last year, they transferred land, water, and resources to the Northwest Territories. And you know what they figured out? They said, you know, we figured something out. We said that when the decisions on these resources are made by people closest to the matter, you get a better decision. And in the United States of America, based on the fundamental principles of liberty, property, and self-governance, we're going exactly the other way. I got to tell you, I don't want Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, or Marco Rubio managing my land. I don't want Dick Durbin or Chuck Schumer managing my land because they don't know the geography or the geology or the climate or the culture or the industry, and they're not here to deal with the emergencies. I mean, think about if you got a garden and it's your main source of food and your main source of income, and you know the climate, and you know the soil, and you know the conditions, and you know how the sunlight is and how the plants react, and you're there if anything happens. Would you rather manage that garden, or would you say, what the heck, let's have somebody thousands of miles away that's got a million other things to worry about. Let's have them manage the garden for us. Does it make any sense at all? Why don't we help our federal partner focus on doing exceptionally well those things that only it can and should be doing? You know, like world peace and sound monetary system. There's enough problems there to keep them busy for a long time, particularly when their revenues are down and they're overspending. Why don't we help our federal partner focus on those things that only it can and should be doing and do them well, and let those whose lives and livelihoods depend upon the wise stewardship of the land, balancing the interests of access and health and productivity? That is a challenge, no doubt about it. There are questions, no doubt about it. There are concerns, no doubt about it. But who better to balance those interests for Utah than Utahns? And the people that you elect, and you can get eyeball to eyeball with them, you know where they live, and you got their cell number, than Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio or Rand Paul or Chuck Schumer or Dick Durbin. That makes sense? That's what Illinois argued, right? Litigation, we appropriated $2 million last year in the legislature to begin building the litigation case. We're building it actively now. We did a request for proposal in the Commission on the Stewardship of Public Lands to hire specialized legal counsel to our commission on public lands issues. We've been meeting with attorneys all over the nation, building the case, and as we build the case, and as we gather the experts, and we gather the evidence, and on our timetable, we'll move forward with the case, hoping that our federal partner, like Canada, will decide to work with us in good faith on a good faith, orderly transfer to honor the very same promises. But we're not going to take no for an answer, just like Illinois and the others do. So what can you do? Well, number one, tell someone. Tell someone. Benjamin Franklin said, type one letter at a time and change the world. You have resources at your disposal he couldn't have even imagined. You can reach thousands of people before you even get out of your pajamas in the morning. Tell someone. Promises are the same. It's already been done. It's the only solution big enough. Join a team on that website. On that website, there's a place where you can log in. And then you can let us know what talents or resources you would like to lend to the effort. If you feel inspired by this, if you feel inflicted or cursed by this information, I hope you do. I hope you can't sleep tonight. Isn't that nice of me? I haven't been able to sleep for years when you look at this. When you wake up in the middle of the night and you think, I would really like to make an impact on this, number one, I promise you that you can, and it's happening all over the West and all over the nation. When you decide that you have to do something about this with whatever resources you have, small or large, let us know. We'll be happy to help you with that, because we're leading the nation on this issue, both with the American Lands Council and with our legislative body and with our county commissioners in the state of Utah. And that we're doing it not because we have great legislators or great leaders, I think we do, but it's because our people understand that liberty cannot exist without the right and control of property. We understand those fundamental principles. Tell someone, join the team, leverage your voice. Your good commissioner, Alan Gardner, who unfortunately is not here tonight, he almost single-handedly, he had the help of some of these other commissioners, got the National Association of Counties to not only do a resolution supporting the transfer of public lands, they added it to their national platform. One man leveraged his voice into millions. One man leveraged his voice into millions. What organizations are you engaged in? What influence do you have? Leverage your voice. Get them to tell someone as well. Tell your leaders, like we talked about. Help them fix their eyes steadily by not assuming that they understand this. And even if they say, I understand and I support, the better question is, what are you doing about it? If you really understand liberty and property and self-governance like Illinois and like those people that came in a handcart, what would they be doing right now? Do that. Tell your leaders frequently, as many ways as you can. Carrier pigeon, email, phone calls when you see them in person. Tell them repeatedly. If you're able to contribute financially, whatever you can do, there's the ability on the website to do that. And then also encourage others. Encourage others. And so when you have that sleepless moment in the middle of the night and in the coming days, and you say, I've got to do something about this, because I know that I have ancestors that came here and delivered those opportunities to me because of what they understood, I want that for my children. We're here to help you do that. Here's where you can sign up and get engaged. There's a petition right here. Please sign the petition. It says, I want better access, better health, and better productivity for our lands through transfer to local control. Get engaged. Sign that petition. You can take a survey. You can spread the word. There's all kinds of information. And then you can actually sign that petition by text. You can text the word sign to that number right there. Let's talk about where we've been and we're going to conclude. Throughout our nation, there are principles worth sacrificing for. And we're here today, and we have the opportunities we have today because people have put everything they had on the line because they believe that. And that's the idea of America that has allowed us to have the prosperity that we have. We are in a period of profound change right now, which makes political possibilities that we could never have imagined before, just like in 1855. When Ronald Reagan in 1987, he made a statement. I want to close with this, and then I'll be happy to take questions. 1987, there was the Cold War going on, right? You had nuclear proliferation, and there were the bombs and the red phone, and everything was tense, and you didn't know if something was going to go off from one minute to the next. And he gave a speech, and I love what he said. And I think if he were here, and I think for us, that same sentiment in what he said is very apt for what we're talking about. He said, this is a wonderful time to be alive. We're lucky not to live in pale and timid times. We've been blessed with the opportunity to stand for something. For liberty and freedom and fairness and property. And these are things worth fighting for. Worth devoting our lives to. So let us go forth with good cheer and stout hearts, happy warriors, out to seize back a country and a world of freedom. Thank you very much. It's been an honor to be with you.